We had just settled into our new home a little over a year ago. After the accident, my daughter and I just couldn't stay there. There were too many memories of my wife. Too many reminders. It's not that we wanted to forget her, it's just that her presence was too palpable to ignore. We packed up our things and left them in boxes in the attic of our new home. Those boxes sat there, untouched, collecting dust, the scent of her summer perfume still lingering on her clothing. I didn't go into the attic after that. Closing those boxes felt like burying her all over again. Each closed lid another shovel of dirt. Closing the attic door felt like lowering the casket again. Neither of us wanted to unearth the dead. After the move, I absorbed myself in my work. I dedicated myself to finishing the novel my wife and I had started together. I wrote on my laptop every day. I pitifully attempted to stamp out the noisy memory of the accident by tapping at my keyboard all day. I finally came to the conclusion that it was useless for me to keep ignoring her. She was there in my writing, right beside me. The only way I could still have her was to write. So I would chase after her until my eyes refused to stay open. My daughter, Cassie, suffered as I did. I allowed my depression to swallow us both. Had I been stronger, perhaps things would not have ended as they had. I regret the part I played in the tempest. Maybe this could have been avoided. Maybe there was no other way. I will never know for sure. Cassie tried to ignore the hurt she felt. I know she did. She spoke to me less. She chose to bear the absence of her mother internally, using less artistic routes. She spent time with her friends while I stayed at home refusing the world. Heavy bass guitar would scream from the speakers of her home theater system. My daughter stayed out late, coming in at questionable hours of the night. I wondered, by the ever-growing gauntness of her face, if she was using drugs. One night, she opened the door to the house at 4 a.m. I angrily shouted that she was grounded and that she could not leave the house anymore. Cassie told me that I could not keep her locked away. She told me that she had to keep going out at night and there was nothing I could do to stop her. She owed it to her mother to keep trying. I didn't know what she meant by that then. I took it to be an emotional jab at me. She pleaded with me to allow her to stay out late. I refused. We stopped talking after that. A week went by. She never left the house. I made sure of it. She stayed in her room. I barely saw her. One night, as I finished the last chapter of the book, I heard a muffled scream from her room. I grabbed the shotgun from my closet and ran downstairs. We lived in a home that sat inside a thick, isolated forest. I kept a means of protection, just in case. I hear loud crashes from inside her room. She cursed as she struggled with whatever found its way in there. She sung words I did not understand. My skin crawled with chills as I approached her door. I felt an overwhelming sense of fear and foreboding. I had heard the body goes cold when it is prepared to fight, as blood stores itself closer to the body to minimize bleeding. I wasn't afraid of dying. I had a gnawing fear that, just like my wife, I couldn't save Cassie. Fright. I felt a presence, anger, malevolence, terror. The door didn't open when I turned the knob. Not knowing where Cassie's location inside the room, I couldn't fire the shotgun to open it. I raised the stock in the air and attacked the doorknob until it flew off. Chips of wood and paint splintered over the floor. I stepped inside the room. Frigid, cold fear. My body felt dead as I entered. A dark man with a dark, cavernous smile stood over my daughter's bed. He turned in my direction and tipped the brim of his black velvet hat towards me. Without explanation, Cassie's stereo turned on. Blaring loud and bravely came the familiar bass chords of The Chain from Fleetwood Mac. My wife loved that song. I swear that I could hear her singing it as she always had, with brazen fire and conviction. The gleam of that golden cord that encircled his hat reflected in my eyes so that I had to shield them. He and his overwhelming presence were gone. I went to my daughter's side, who sobbed under the sheets of her bed, a soft moan released from her lips, the kind one emits when they know their death is imminent. Her eyes bulged, and she released a shriek so that I was forced to cover my ears. Tears streamed from the corners of her eyes. She did not recognize me. She didn't recognize anything. Her eyes glazed as if they were trapped behind a one-way mirror with no way to see out. Her left hand frantically searched for an object on her bed. As she grasped it, her eyes centered on me. She brought it to her chest, eyes locked on mine, and she held it tight. It was the worn and tattered plushie my wife had bought for her as a toddler. I thought we had boxed that thing up in the attic. How had it found its way here? A resemblance of calm returned to my daughter. She clung to the plushie like a life raft. I asked her what had happened and who that person was. All she could say was, "Tempest." She fainted shortly after, and I could not rouse her. She breathed lightly, and I found her pulse, but every effort I made to wake her met with futility. I couldn't be sure what I was dealing with. Not being a religious man, I refused to look for supernatural explanations for the intruder. He must have used the moment I was blinded to escape. I hadn't heard the door open. He must still be in the house. I went from room to room looking for where he may have left the house, but I found none. No doors unlocked, no windows broken, no trap doors existing in the house. I gripped my shotgun harder and searched every crevice of the house. I looked inside showers, under beds, inside closets, and in the garage, all with my pulse ramming against my neck. I couldn't find a sign of a hiding place. By the time I finished, the first rays of the morning sun shone through the windows. I didn't think it wise to call the police. I had no evidence to give them, and my daughter lay comatose upstairs. All I could do was make sure that every door was locked and return to my daughter's room. I braced a chair against the door and placed the wooden rocking chair facing it. I rested the shotgun in my lap and rocked nervously. My wife used to nurse Cassie in this chair. It seemed fitting that I sat as a sentinel in it now. I looked over at Cassie, her skin no longer a healthy hue, and felt cool to the touch. Her pulse and breathing felt normal, her face tensed in pain. The tone of her skin had turned a light gray. Black spidery veins rippled underneath. I turned around, startled, as a book hit the ground. It must have fallen from her desk. I opened it up. A journal my wife had given her last year. I skimmed through it to find answers there. Maybe she had taken drugs, or worse. It contained mostly typical teen angst and sullen feelings over boys. Some had to do with an interest in her mother's affinity for paganism. Cassie wrote like her mother still lived. What pain she must have been in when her mother died. She fixated on topics dealing with her mother's interest and personality. I loved her mother, but I knew this to be an unhealthy obsession. She lamented our arguments. Cassie never blamed me. I sighed with relief. She wrote kindly about our falling out and how it had saddened her. She didn't stop loving me. She wanted me to know she fought something inside her. Something that I shouldn't have to deal with. She didn't want to lose me too. I didn't understand. I swallowed hard and continued reading. My attention drew itself to pictures she had drawn on several of the pages. I almost dropped the book when I realized what they were. They were drawings of that dark man. As I read, my horror bled into my hands as they shook. This character was in our story. My wife had came up with the idea for him, but she had never said where she had gotten it from. Had she seen this man too? Cassie described in lucid detail meeting this man one night when he appeared over her bed. He had told Cassie that he knew her mother. She knew this man was an apparition, and she didn't trust him. Her mother had taught her better than that. He offered to help Cassie meet her mother. Cassie knew this evil creature meant to harm her. She blamed this thing for her mother's death, and she swore to find a way to stop it. In later pages, she drew strange pink pills alongside sketches of that shadowy monster. It seemed to indicate that the two were related in a way, and she could not convey it through speech when she drew the picture. She believed that man was a supernatural presence. She fought something, indeed, herself and her grief. She chose to have something to attack and to blame rather than to face the truth. Sad, really. My heart went out to her suffering, for I felt it too. I decided to stand guard over her that night. I brought the family Bible, an heirloom really, from the library. I felt silly bringing these trinkets of faith. I removed the silver cross necklace which held its place over Matthew 16:19 and wrapped it around my wrist. My wife embraced spirituality and chose to learn from every source. It was not odd that she owned this Bible or any other number of spiritual texts from various other religions. Deep russet orange light painted the entire room with a sinister hue. How had it become this late so soon? Had I not seen the morning sun through the window in my daughter's room just an hour ago? I felt something peering at me from the edges of the newborn shadows lurking out with the evaporating light. I flipped the switch of the lamp on her desk. Light bulb must have died. I yanked the cord on the overhead fan light. Nothing. Odd. My attention returned to the dark man in the hat. The character in our story. He wore a sharp-brimmed hat made of aged black leather. His name was Cyrus. He sowed discord and fear wherever he journeyed. He was Hell's assassin and a destroyer of dreams. He existed between worlds. Only the perceptive could see him, and if he noticed you watching him, you were his next target. Once he found you, he would drain you of every joy you ever experienced, until you withered and died. He dined on souls that way, by draining them of all will, happiness, and hope. But he was fictional. A character we had created together. Or had we? The only common link between my wife Cassie and that smug smiling demon lay in that book. I thought it worth a chance to investigate. I bolted upstairs into the attic. I opened box after box of my wife's belongings. Her perfume greeted and comforted me as it always did. Tension left my shoulders briefly before I set about the task of finding how that apparition, my daughter and wife, were linked. Barely any light now. I pulled the chain to the light bulb. No light. Strange. No light worked in the house. Did the electricity stop working? I looked down at my watch. The hands of the watch had stopped moving. I noticed how chilly it had gotten all of a sudden. I pulled my shirt closer to me. I found a burnt wooden box buried beneath assortments of odd jewelry and arcane instruments. This box, strangely, had been reopened since we had moved in. My wife had a fascination with the occult since I had met her in high school. I admit that the occult was interesting to me only so much as any psychological disorder can marvel the mind. Everyone had their eccentricities. I let her be happy with hers, and she let me be happy with mine. She rarely mentioned anything about her beliefs to me, though. I suppose because she knew I would scoff at her for it. I could not deny the serenity and happiness she felt when she walked outside in the forest. That was one of the reasons we chose this remote location to live. She loved the woods and the river. I found her often naked and dancing under the pines or in the water. She invited me often, and I couldn't refuse such a provocatively sensuous woman as she. The world consisted of just us. When we were entwined together on the pine floor, everything felt magical and surreal, like a dream. In fact, Cassie had been conceived after such an outing. Had these items helped conjure the man in that hat? It wasn't possible. My wife was a gentlewoman. I could never imagine her doing such a thing, even in jest. I laid the box down and broke the lock with the stock of my shotgun. The box contained a partially burnt leather notebook. A deep hole had been stabbed through the book by the dagger that lay beside it. I opened the book. I cried out in horror as I read through the journal. The same pictures of the dark-hatted figure proliferated the pages. In several entries, my wife spoke about a curse she called the Tempest. That was the same word Cassie had called out before she passed out. My wife mentioned Cyrus and a being named Demiurge. One of the last entries detailed her attempts to capture, contain, and destroy the malevolent entity which she named Cyrus. Loud scraping hurt my ears. As I read the word, my blood ran cold. I looked up through the attic window to the fading light outside. Something perched at the window, watching me. A bleeding shadow. All color fled from my vision. The Hat Man had returned. His hands pressed on the pane, sounding like splitting glass. He poked at the glass with his wispy, translucent fingers, trying to find a way inside to me. Two craggy, yellow eyes shifted behind the shadowy mass of his face. I couldn't deny it any longer. My wife fought against this monster, and now Cassie. Why didn't they ever tell me? Cyrus awaited us in the night, smug, biding his time, knowing that we weren't going anywhere. He showed himself to me just to let me know that. The craggy smile widened as he tapped the rhythm to the chain with nails of iron, laughing at the irony. We were trapped. Not happy laughing, but the kind one utters when they have cornered their prey. The walls closed in. Their edges grew sharp and angular. The shadows blackened with all their oppressive might. Deeper. They breathed the man's breath from the growing shadows. They closed around like claws, like teeth. The sharp metallic scent of iron filled my nose and mouth. I remembered the Bible and cross downstairs. But the cross had been on my wrist. Anyway, I took the book and dagger with me. No good those are, or sprawled down the side wall of the stairs. At the bottom landing, in blood, was written, "You have no faith." I ran down the hall to Cassie's room. On the floor and walls was written, "You could have saved her, and you wanted solitude, and now you have it, forever." Exhilaration from the endorphins in my blood quickened now with anger. We weren't animals to be tormented on a whim. I didn't know what I could do, but something would be done, and by me. This thing would not hurt Cassie. My hand grasped the door and thrust it open. Dear God, help me. Help her, I gasped loudly. Tangi, help us all. A weak, cloudy figure stood over my daughter. Cassie's screams erupted as he started his torment anew. I thrust myself between them. Lashes of blood formed across my skin. Tangi, please, help her, I called out. I heard the rattle of a pill bottle hitting the floor. It rolled to my feet. Her music began to play. Those chords thundered like an angry angel. She bolstered my courage even now. I picked the bottle up like a weapon and opened the top. Pink. I downed the entire bottle with a gulp. This was her sign. This had to be the way. He tormented them, and they dared to confront him. My wife had lost. My daughter was losing. And now it was my turn to face the Hat Man.